Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Matilda Mallinson. It's Tuesday the 31st of March 2026. Today, Israel's new death law. Israel has passed a law prescribing the death penalty for Palestinians convicted of fatal acts of terrorism.
בעד חוק עונש מוות, 62, 48 מתנגדים, נמנע אחד. אני קובעת כי הצעת חוק עונש מוות למחבלים, תשפ"ו 2026, התקבלה בקריאה השנייה והשלישית, והחוק ייכנס לספר החוקים של מדינת ישראל. שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. עם ישראל חי!
Scenes of celebration in Israel's parliament, the Knesset, as the death penalty for terrorists law was passed by 62 votes to 47. The death penalty is already legal in Israel, but only 2 executions have actually occurred since 1948. One of those, the execution of Adolf Eichmann, one of the primary Nazi architects of the Holocaust. This law strips back long-standing judicial safeguards that heavily restricted use of the death penalty. It removes the need for a unanimous decision by a panel of judges, requiring a simple majority instead. It allows more junior-level judges to impose death sentences, and it allows them to do so even if the prosecution didn't request it. Executions themselves must be carried out by hanging within 90 days of the sentence becoming final. They will be confidential, executioners will be anonymous, and they may even carry out the act of execution in the sole presence of a prison warden. And it's structurally designed to exclusively target Palestinians while shielding Jewish Israelis from capital punishments, even if they commit murder in the name of extremism as per the law. But the law specifies that that act of violence must be committed with the intent of denying the existence of the State of Israel. As well as structural provisions, lawmakers routinely have framed the law in explicitly ethno-national terms, describing it as a measure to punish those who kill Jews.
כל מחבל וידע העולם כולו, מי שנוטל חיים, מדינת ישראל תיטול את חייו.
If you were watching closely, you'll have noticed a pin on Ben Gvir's collar, speaking there. It was also on the collar of many lawmakers in that room. A pin of a noose is being worn as a symbol of pride by Israeli lawmakers. Those who wear it argue that the law will deter violence and protect Jewish life. But critics and human rights organizations condemn the law as a discriminatory provision for racialized judicial killing. They also call it a violation of international law, as it extends Israeli law extraterritorially into illegally occupied Palestine. They say it could even constitute a war crime. The bill was also criticised by Israeli opposition lawmakers who defined it as violent religious extremism on a par with Hamas.
אנחנו לא כמו החמאס. אנחנו בדיוק ההפך מהחמאס. אנחנו לא באנו למזרח התיכון כדי לקבל עלינו את חוקי השריעה. אנחנו לא הקמנו מדינה יהודית בשביל לקבל על עצמנו את הסטנדרטים המוסריים של האסלאם הרדיקלי.
What does this new law mean for Palestinians, and what does it say about Israel? I'm joined first by Palestinian politician and General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative, Mustafa Barghouti. Mustafa, welcome to MEE Live. What is your reaction to this news of this new law?
Well, first of all, I must say that this law came to legitimize what Israel is already doing, which is illegitimate field execution and assassination of Palestinian people. We have had so many Palestinian leaders, so many Palestinian innocent civilians killed through assassination or killed through these acts of field execution, and the number could be in the thousands in the case of Gaza, without even passing this law. But this law comes in to legitimize the process of execution against Palestinians. And it actually means three very important things. First of all, it's another illegal, unlawful act of the Israeli political system and parliament, where it is trying to impose a law on occupied people. West Bank is not part of Israel. Gaza is not part of Israel. Jerusalem is not part of Israel. And passing this law and applying it to the citizens of these areas is illegal by international law and a violation of UN resolutions. Second, this law shows how deep and how fast Israel has moved towards fascism. And those who spoke in the Knesset about this law, supporting it, starting with the fascist Ben Gvir, or the lady who was leading the session at the end, they all represented very clear fascist tendencies. But this law was supported by the Prime Minister of Israel and by the governing parties in Israel. And Netanyahu, who failed to show up to many of his court sessions that were trying him for corruption cases, managed to come to the parliament and just specifically to vote for passing this law, although he's busy with the war, as he says. Third, this law really consolidates the system of apartheid in Palestine, because it says that if a Palestinian kills an Israeli Jewish person, he will be executed. If an Israeli Jewish person kills a Palestinian, he will not be subjected to this law. This law is specifically and only for the Palestinians who are suffering from occupation, suffering from a system of apartheid. What we've seen in the Knesset is nothing but a war crime. And you've seen how these fascists celebrated passing this terrible, inhumane, and undemocratic law. And you've seen them with the pens on their jackets and on their dresses, showing the robe that will hang Palestinians. And you've seen their statements and declarations. All of that could not happen except in a fascist system. And I think what Israel has done has gone way beyond the system of apartheid in South Africa, where nobody there dared to say that if a black person kills a white man, he will be executed. But if a white person kills a black person, he will not be executed. They didn't say do that. They didn't dare to do it. But Israel is doing it.
I want to
and in my opinion, finally, this is not only a war crime, but this is something that deserves more than any time before, imposing sanctions on this Israeli system.
There's a lot to unpack in there. I mean, it's illegal under international law. It represents fascism becoming mainstreamed in Israeli society, and it's an apartheid and racially discriminatory law that calls for international community reactions. I want to just first zoom in on how you started, which was about Palestinians' reactions and how this actually affects Palestinians. You pointed out that in many ways this is just legitimizing a policy of extremely violent, fatal violence by the Israeli state against Palestinians. It's just legitimizing something that already exists. Does this feel like a significant change? Is this having a heavy impact on Palestinian society? Or by now, is it just like, what else is new?
No, of course, it's very significant because it adds another message to Palestinians that there is no solution between us and them. It sends a message that Israel is not ready for any form of compromise or peace. And they didn't only kill Oslo Agreement, which, although it had many flaws, they didn't only kill any potential or any possibility of negotiations for more than 12 years. More than that, they are now passing laws that tell Palestinians that there is no place for reconciliation here. There is no place for a compromise that many people speak about, supporting what they call two-state solution. Where is the two-state solution? It's finished. And Israel will just continue to do that unless there is a different attitude from the international community, stopping this system of double standard and imposing sanctions on Israel. They will not listen to anything but the power of force. And in this case, the power of sanctions that should be imposed on them.
What do you have to say about the joint statement condemning this policy that has been signed by the UK, by France, by Germany, by Italy? Joint statements, what do they do?
They mean nothing to Israel. The condemnations, UN resolutions, all of that are papers for Israel that mean nothing. And in my opinion, what they are doing is simply ignoring all these condemnations, and because they don't think that these condemnations will mean anything. Probably Israel is keeping thousands of these condemnations, and they don't care about them. So these countries who condemned the Israeli behavior should announce clearly that this is not a democracy as they claim. They keep telling us that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. I want the German government, the British government, the Italian government, the rest of the European governments to come out now and say this is not a democratic entity. That's the least they can do. But also they should come out with sanctions on Israel, stopping all the economic privileges and scientific research privileges that Israel is given by the European Union. Show something, do something. Without that, condemnations mean nothing. But I should also add that it is so strange and shameful that the United States government supported this Israeli measure, declaring that Israel is a sovereign country and has the right to pass any law it wants. But they don't have the right to pass a law on occupied people. That's what the American side is missing. But we are not surprised, because this unconditional American support to Israel is another indication that those who claim or dream of the United States being a mediator should give up these dreams. Enough is enough. There was an illusion of a possibility of compromise through negotiations. It's gone. There was another illusion about the United States being a mediator, and it's gone. We have to rely not only on our struggle, but on the strong solidarity of all people who are for justice, who support the rights of the people to be free, and who should be supporting the right of the Palestinian people to struggle for its freedom.
Of course, Israel has framed this law as a necessary measure of self-defense. That's the line that is also iterated by America in justifying, as you describe it there, unconditional support for Israel. This law has been framed by Israel as a necessary deterrence to targeted violence against Jewish people. Of course, the penal system Israel uses against Palestinians is already incredibly harsh. Use of torture, use of sexual torture, and often death inside prisons. If deterrence is an effective policy, then why, in Israel's minds, has it not already worked? What do you think that the long-term consequences of this policy are likely to be for peace and violence in the region?
It will encourage violence. And it is sending a message that Israel has no interest whatsoever in peace. Who's going to punish those who killed 20,000 Palestinian children in Gaza? Who's going to punish those who bombarded and killed 72,000 Palestinians, mostly civilians, in Gaza? Who's going to punish those who killed 4 more Palestinians today in Gaza? Who's going to punish all these terrorist gangs that are moving around in the West Bank, burning houses, burning cars, shooting and killing more than 10 people already? We are the victims in this conflict. We are the victims of Israeli violence, and not vice versa. And to keep claim that Israel is the victim while Israel is the occupier, that has practiced the worst form of ethnic cleansing in modern history, and that is trying again to practice ethnic cleansing against Palestinians is unacceptable. And what impact this will have? First of all, it's a big threat to the lives of Palestinian prisoners, those who are detained now and those who will be detained tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I have no doubt that the fascist Ben Gvir, who is now torturing Palestinian prisoners, and I would call them Palestinians who have been kidnapped by Israel, he will not refrain from reopening the case against some prisoners who have already been judged and who have been sentenced probably to life imprisonment. He probably will reopen the cases to achieve execution of these people. So the risk is very high, but the risk is very high for everybody because that shows you how far fascism in Israel has gone with a country, if you can call it so, where 90% of the people support war. That is a very clear indication of how deep fascism has grown inside Israel.
Mustafa Barghouti, thank you for joining us on Middle East Eye. And now, a look inside the society that has not only passed this law, but celebrated it. Gideon Levy is an Israeli author and journalist, and he joins us now. Welcome, Gideon. What's your reaction to the death penalty for terrorists law?
I don't remember many days in which I was so ashamed like today, the day that this law passed. From both aspects. First of all, I don't want to live in a state which executes people. A death penalty is really only in dark regimes and in the United States, which in many cases is also a dark regime. But here it's not only about this. It is also about the racist, explosive nature of this bill. They say very clearly it is on a racist basis. There are Jews who can murder and do horrible things and will not be executed. And there are Arabs who, because they're Arabs, will be executed. This is maybe the first time that Israel declares itself as a racist country in such an explicit way, in such a clear way, because there are no ways to cover it up here. No ways, because it says it very clearly. That's a law only for one people over another people who is the superior people. This is unbearable for me.
I have to say, your reaction is a stark contrast to the reaction that we just saw in the Knesset. We've seen applause, lawmakers wearing a pin with a noose on it, practically tears of joy in some people's cases. This is how far-right lawmaker Limor Son Harmelesh explained this apparent joy.
החוק הזה הוא הביטוי המוסרי ביותר של אומה חפצה בחיים. הוא קובע משוואה ישירה וברורה. מי שמחליט לרצוח יהודים רק בשל היותם יהודים, אחת דתו למות.
She talks about this being a nation that loves life and about this being a moral policy, referring to the death penalty. For anyone watching, just thinking, how does this add up? Can you explain this rationale from that particular Israeli perspective?
For them, the Jews and the Israeli Jews are a chosen people. For them, there is a big difference between Jewish blood and any other blood, by the way, not only Palestinian blood, any other blood. For those dark people, killing is a reason to open champagne bottles. By the end of the day, I never saw, by the way, opening champagne bottles in the Israeli parliament. It wasn't champagne, it was something much cheaper, obviously, because those people also have no style. But this I say, by the way, to open bottles like you can see now and to have a toast for killing, I mean, finally, it's about killing human beings, which by definition is something immoral, by definition. But for them, anything which guarantees the Jewish blood, which protects, in their view, the Jewish blood, is legitimate. And for them, killing one Jew is like killing 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 Palestinians.
Will the
That's
reaction
their mindset.
Will the
That's their
reaction
mindset.
among wider Israeli society, will their reaction mirror the applause that we've just seen in the parliament?
Partly and partly. I guess a big part of Israelis are very happy about it. There is a small minority who is as annoyed as I am. And in between is, again, the biggest enemy of all of us, namely indifference.
As well as pushing the death sentence, this new law prohibits the release of anyone convicted, suspended, or accused of an offence punishable by death. It's unclear if this could be retroactively applied, but by one reading, this could effectively ban prisoner or hostage exchanges, which are often considered the best chance of freedom for certain key Palestinian leaders, for example, Marwan Barghouti. Politically, could this law be used by Israel as a means to continue severing Palestine from its most viable future leaders?
They don't need this law. I must remind ourselves that Israel is executing leaders massively for decades. Only in this war with Iran, we killed half of their leadership without a trial. We execute everywhere. We execute now peasants, farmers, Palestinian farmers on a daily basis without anyone being brought to justice. So this kind of execution exists in Israel, and maybe now we are becoming more of state of law because now we have a law, and before there was no law. But if you take it more seriously, you see that this is really unprecedented, those details you mentioned, because even in the United States, in those states that still have those dark, primitive states and racist states who still have the death penalty, there is a way out. There is amnesty. There is an option of amnesty. You can appeal. Here, nothing. It's really frightening. The only hope, and we have to mention it, because it's a very reasonable hope, that the Supreme Court of Israel will put an end to this horrible fantasy, or should I say nightmare, and they will dismiss this law, and this law will never be implemented. That's my hope, but I cannot guarantee it.
As you point out, it is anomalous for a society to be introducing the death penalty. The general trend globally is for countries to move away from state-sanctioned killings. And in response, this law in Israel has sparked international criticism. There's been a joint statement by the UK, France, Italy, Germany, who is a strong supporter of Israel by many metrics. How will this impact Israel's global reputation? And does that matter to Israeli lawmakers?
I guess you know the answer. I mean, Israel is really sick and tired, and so am I, of condemnations, of international condemnations, mainly from the EU. It is ridiculous. If the EU wants to punish Israel for something, it should take measures. Those condemnations are hollow, lip service, just that the EU can feel good with itself. And it's really start to be really ridiculous, those declarations. If there is something that Israel does wrong, Israel should pay for it or be punished. If the international community thinks that Israel did something basically wrong, but there are ways, like, for example, with Russia, condemnations are a joke, really a joke. And Israel is totally indifferent to those condemnations because, you know, not much left from Israel's reputation in any case. It is in any case already a pariah state, and one more condemnation or one less will not change anything.
It's something that occurs to people reading this news is that the death penalty is already technically legal in Israel, but it's only been used twice since 1948. Why has Israel only performed 2 executions in its history? And what does this change at this time signal about the direction of travel?
it was always very clear that this, first of all, it's not in a civilian law, it's a military law, emergency law, which enable to execute. And it was always very clear that we never use it except of the case of Adolf Eichmann. And by the way, if it would be for me, I wouldn't execute Adolf Eichmann either. But that's too late now. In any case, it is as we call it in Hebrew, a dead letter in the Israeli law, and now they revived it, and surprise, surprise, they are going to implement it. And if it depends on them, on those who had the toast yesterday, who raised the toast yesterday, it will be dozens and dozens and dozens on a daily basis if it depends on them.
Gideon Levy, thank you so much for your time here on Middle East Eye. Now, for the humanitarian impact this will have, I'm joined by Shai Parnes from Beit Salem, an Israeli human rights organisation. Shai, welcome to MEE Live. What is so controversial about this law, besides the obvious controversy surrounding the death penalty in any context? What about this law is so particularly controversial?
It's nothing controversial about this law. It's a racist law. It's an abysmal law of an apartheid regime. I cannot accept that it's controversial, that to put all the residents of the occupied territories in the West Bank under this law, I cannot accept this term as controversial. This law means just another tool in the Israeli toolkit to kill Palestinians.
Thank you for checking that language. Actually, as you mentioned, this is occupied territory that this law is being applied in. Under international law, what jurisdiction does Israel actually hold over people in occupied territories?
Well, I have to say that even according to this occupation law, it's an illegal occupation since the ICJ advisory opinion a couple of years ago. So it's an illegal occupation, not only as B'Tselem stance, it's the high UN court stance, means Israel must withdraw. Israel has no jurisdiction whatsoever about the residents in the West Bank. Again, not as B'Tselem stance, it's the ICJ stance.
Israel is unique for the scale of its imprisonment of Palestinian children. Is there a concern that children could be sentenced to death under this new law?
So right now, as we're speaking, there's 10,000 Palestinians under Israel custody, among them some dozens of kids. But usually under Israeli law, there's supposed to be a whole different phrasing and wording for any law that address minors. So as far as we understand this current law, it's not going to be applied on anyone under the age of 18.
Thank you for bringing clarity there. Can you tell us what impact the announcement of this law has had on Palestinians? What are people afraid of?
I don't think as far as we're in touch, and we are, with Palestinians, it didn't change much on the daily basis. There was still army raids and settler attacks today, and they are afraid for their life just for being Palestinians in the occupied territories. What this law gives to Israel is, again, as I put it before, is another tool to kill Palestinians. I have to remind our audience that not only Israel killed more than 72,000 Palestinians in the almost 2 years and a half in the Gaza genocide, but more than 1,050 Palestinians in the West Bank since October 2023. So it's already very dangerous to be Palestinians in the occupied territories due to Israel's lethal open fire policy and other policies. And still we are very concerned that what this law does is bring this death penalty into the Israel law.
You are right to point out that there has been a massive spike in extrajudicial killings of Palestinians by Israeli forces and settlers over the past couple of years. But certainly within the judicial system, this not only marks a change, we're seeing quite a serious radicalization of judicial and penal policies towards Palestinians. That has also been happening for a couple of years. Beit Salem recently published a report about the deteriorating treatment of Palestinian prisoners. Just talk us through your findings and how this new law fits into that.
So I have to say, this Living Hell was an update to our Welcome to Hell report on the summer of 2 summers ago. And I have to say that since Welcome to Hell was published, we didn't see any change whatsoever. Pretty much all Palestinians who are being held under Israeli detention centers and those torture facilities, and it's about approximately 10,000 of them, suffering from daily violence and beating, constant degradation, deprivation of sleep, and pretty much any kind of mental and physical abuse one can think of. And in several cases, we also got testimonies of severe sexual violence. I have to mention also that Israel totally prohibited the ICRC coming to these facilities. These people are completely excluded from the outside world, and that's also a feature of what we call torture camps.
How do we explain this radicalizing judicial policy towards Palestinians? Are there particular individuals who are steering these events, these acts?
So I have to address it in 2 levels. One is it's a process of 70 years of apartheid regime, of occupation, of segregation and separation in all levels, in residence, in education systems, in labor, and in the impunity of any Israeli who's harming Palestinians. And the second part is the real shock and fear that the Israelis felt on October 7th was used and mobilized by this current Israeli most radical, right-wing, violent and brutal government ever to force total war on the Palestinian people and to bring about total dehumanization in the Israeli discourse of Palestinians, but also contribute a lot to the Gaza genocide and to the ethnic cleansing we're seeing in the West Bank and to this ill treatment the Palestinians receive or suffer in those torture facilities.
And finally, our last speaker, Gideon Levy, said that there is small hope in the potential of the law still being overturned in the Supreme Court. How likely is that to happen?
I have to say, I don't really see it as a hope, because we know this law has been passed. It has been passed by a majority, which does represent the majority of the Israeli Jewish public opinion. And we can see that on polls. So yeah, it might be better if Israel court will dismiss this law, but we have to accept the fact that this law has been passed by a majority who represent the electorate.
For today, that's all that we have time for. But before we lose you, we want to hear from you. Please send in your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform or email meelive@middleeasteye.net. We'll be here at 5 p.m. GMT, noon in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday. See you then.